Okay, Kathy, if you can give me your name, date of birth, and where you were born.
My name is Cathy Siegentaler. I was born November 4th, 1951 in St. Louis, Missouri.
And what are your parents' names?
My parents' names are Carl Siegentaler and Eva Beck Siegentaler.
You said 1951?
1951 I was born.
Okay. And and any siblings?
I have 5 siblings. I'm the oldest of 6. Would you like their names?
Yes.
Oh, okay. So next comes my sister Margot Siegentaler, David Siegentaler, Susan and Terry Siegentaler, and then Heidi Siegentaler.
And what do they do, basically, for a living?
Actually, Margot is working in Seattle with the Seattle Public Schools as an ombudsman. My sister Susan was the family programs director at a settlement house in Seattle. She just left that and is into exciting new things, which we don't know what they are yet. And then my brother David is the Western Region Project Coordinator for U.S. Parks, the National Park System. And my sister Terry is the I'm not quite sure what the title of her position is, but she is the land manager for a ranch system near Austin, Texas, which she develops programs for people and plants and animals, preserving their cultures and etc. And then my sister Heidi is in Austin, Texas, and she is a massage therapist and horse carer.
Horse takes care of horses. Mm-hmm. Okay. And so you grew up in St. Louis too?
Yes. Until I was 7.
Till you were 7.
Yeah. Then we moved to
what part of St. Louis?
In inner city St. Louis. My dad was the director of Caroline Mission, which is a settlement house, and my mother was the preschool teacher there.
Okay, so it's a settlement house like Jane Addams?
Yes, yeah, in that tradition. I'm also a social worker. He was a social worker minister of that settlement house, so it was in the inner city of St. Louis, in kind of a Appalachian and African American community that was segregated, and so a lot of the projects had to do with doing combined programs in the communities.
So he was a social worker, and you said you were a social worker.
I am, yeah.
So you're a social worker now?
Yes.
So, I mean, we're going kind of back and forth, but I mean, what do you do? I mean,
yeah, so I am kind of, I think all of us in our family kind of followed in our parents' footsteps in some ways. They're very inspirational for us. So I now am actually clinical social worker working with children and families in the KSSN, Kent School Service Center community as part of an Arbor Circle agency and mental health agency here in Grand Rapids. And so I work at the Southwest Community Campus, which is about, 80% Latino. Most of them come from immigrant families. And with some diversity of African American, Anglo also.
Up here by Kalamazoo, or is that the one by Kalamazoo?
The
Arbor Circle, you said?
Oh, Arbor Circle. Arbor Circle's main main campus is up near Leonard and Ball. But KSSN has clinicians in 7 or 8 schools, and so I work in one of the schools.
And
Southwest.
These are kids referred by the court, or?
No, these are actually from the school primarily, or they can be self-referred. So it's a community mental health program that is available to the students and families in the school.
Are they abused children? Or?
Some of them. I mean, it's any kind of situation that might come up in a school, which is why I like it, because there's a big diversity of things that come up. Many of them are actually having a really hard time in school, so that's how they get identified. And they could be having a hard time for things that are going on at home, things that are going on at school, learning problems, any number of things that could be presenting barriers to their success.
Okay, and so going back to St. Louis, what do you remember of that? You said the community was segregated.
All right. Well, I like that question because actually one of my very memorable experiences growing up as a kid in that situation was that I went to a preschool. My parents believed in early childhood education, and my mother was early childhood educator. And our preschool at the settlement house, Caroline Mission, was an integrated preschool. So there were African American families, white families. I think basically from Appalachian back. Many of the white families in the community had come up from Appalachia. Actually, I'm sorry, not Appalachia, Ozarks. This is Missouri.
Okay, from Missouri.
I'm wrong there, Ozarks. And so anyway,
so there's a difference between the Ozarks?
There's a big difference. That was just,
So, I mean, what is it? Oh, Appalachians are what, more Irish? Or,
well, I mean, there's a difference. I'm not sure I could really define the difference. Okay. To me, as a little kid, right. I mean, they were just kids in the preschool, so I only know this after the fact.
I know that Latinos have differences in different countries.
Right, yes.
I'm just trying to get
well, I think that, and I should do it, but I'm really not sure. Ethnically, they were, European immigrants into the rural areas of Missouri, and I think there were more Scottish, but I actually don't really know. I've forgotten right now specifically which European immigrants they came into that area, but they were poor, and they had left the rural areas and come into the city, just like the African American community had come from the south up, and were also low economic.
So they're not really south, because St. Louis is not south.
Well, St. Louis is kind of right
on the border.
It's right on the border, and so one of my memorable experience related to being active in community and stuff partly is that I went in this integrated, whatever, anybody could come to preschool. And then my elementary school, when I started kindergarten, was white, segregated. So I had no, sense of, racial differences, et cetera, that I know of until I was going to kindergarten. But actually in kindergarten, it was a very bizarre experience because the black kids would be walking by the school, and the white kids would be making fun of the black kids. And of course that was like totally foreign to my, thinking, value system, everything at that point. So
why? Because your father was involved in
because these kids were, kids, and I have friends that were black, and here these white kids were making fun of those black kids. So I'm just saying that coming from the settlement house where I had friends and families, and we were, from various backgrounds.
So you already had friends that were
right,
African American, black.
Yep, yeah, but then.
So you always lived in that type of situation.
Yeah, I lived in that situation. Yeah, okay. But the school was segregated, so consequently, my first years of elementary school were pretty negative. Yeah, I really hardly had friends. I think I was very quiet in school, and I think that may have been part of the reason, because I had a hard time putting these worlds together. I don't know that my parents really had an idea that was going on for me, because for sure, because I was always a good student. I liked the academic.
Did your parents talk about that, or?
Well, like I said, much later, I talked with them about my early perceptions of that, and they were. I think my mother was busy starting to raise 6 kids at home, and my dad was at the settlement house working very many hours, that they probably just didn't have the sense that this was... I didn't come home saying there were any problems. But my memory is
that... Were they kind of liberal-minded, your parents, or...?
Oh, they were very. Well, I mean, they were involved in doing all this, combining of communities and, actually wanting to do away with the segregated schools, of course.
Because they were involved.
Yeah, but I actually went to one.
Okay.
So it was a little bit of a different experience. But what I reflect back on is how natural it was to be in a community with people of different backgrounds, and then all of a sudden, some people, there was a separation that people were also dealing with, and it was. I actually don't remember. I'm sure I was aware in those first years that my parents' job, role in the community, what they were doing was to deal with some of these issues. The issues were coming up. They were causing segregation and low economic, poverty, and all the kind of social issues that were going on for these families. They were active in remediating that or interacting with that. But as a little kid, my perception got really impacted by the fact that I went to a school that was way different than our value system.
Okay, so your parents, were they just social workers, or were they also active in the left? Or
Yeah.
In the left classes?
Well, yeah. My dad was also a minister. He was a minister and social worker, but he had also.
What church?
At that time, it was Evangelical and Reformed that became United Church of Christ.
Okay, United Church of Christ, pretty active.
Yes,
church,
yeah. But he had actually was a conscientious objector during World War II, which is rather different. He talked about how he went to Yale Divinity School, and he had been around certain people there that had influenced him to think about how the United States was really not that we should not object to what was going on with World War II, but that we were so ramming up the power message from our country that needed to be, called out. So he objected. He was a conscientious objector and served some jail time during World War II. So, yeah. So he was very involved, particularly at that point in Christian faith-based, reactions to things that were going on.
Was that a lot of conscientious objectors then, or?
Well, there were a certain number. He
went to jail.
Yes, yeah. Well, he was part of a group, and I know the names of these things, but I have to kind of go back and look them up in the book. But there was something called Fellowship of Reconciliation, and there's various groups that he was kind of part of at that time that helped. Like I said, the brothers, I'm forgetting their name, were very influential. I'll have to come back. There's some theologians and people and active, and the Niebers, and I think actually the Niebers that were there was some difference in that family, but our family, they were kind of involved. Actually, my grandfather, my father's father, went to school with Reinhold Niebuhr.
Well known at that time.
Yeah, my grandfather went to school with Reinhold Niebuhr at Elmhurst College in Illinois, and But later on, I think there was a social responsibility kind of message that was constantly put out as far as faith-based, but for the community and not just for a particular select group of people. And what is our responsibility to community? So that kind of value was something I was raised with. And my father had gone to school. One of his professors was R.H. Niebuhr, and so we had this idea of thinking, reflecting on what is our country doing that is really fulfilling the values that we're saying we're doing. So what are the contradictions between what we say, what we do, worldwide in our communities? That was kind of like reflection. And later on, when we moved from St. Louis to California, and actually...
That's when you're 7 years old.
That was when I was 7, yes. Okay. We moved out on Highway 66.
1950, you went to...
1959.
On Route 66.
Route 66.
That was a fun.
We went from St. Louis to Los Angeles on Route 66.
Right.
And it was a 2-lane highway.
Okay, I just remember the song.
We did. And I didn't know how well known it would be at the point in time. That was the only highway to go out to California. Right. And we had a mattress on top of the car, and it flew off. Anyway, that was just half of our family. Was that a move by a
lot of people?
Pardon?
Was that a move because
No. We didn't go in. We didn't go in a whole big rush. We just went because my father had taken a job working with Settlement House in Los Angeles.
In Los Angeles.
Yeah.
Okay.
And actually, he had to switch from UCC to Presbyterian, so we got involved in that denomination. But that consequently opened up a whole new, environment or world for us in Southern California. And I started to become aware of how close we were to Mexico and kind of that whole, interaction, interrelationship of cultures and people migrating, moving, and coming in touch.
So before that, you were not
I don't
connected
think
to Latinos.
No, because like I said, it was inner city St. Louis
But
that
Los
was more
Angeles
African American.
is a lot of Latinos, yeah.
Yeah, so we were out there, and also became involved. We actually moved to a suburb of Los Angeles, West Covina, in Monte Vista. And I started learning Spanish a little bit just during recess.
Okay.
But my father was involved in settlement houses throughout the area, so we would go with him and visit these different communities. So I, was exposed to a number of different communities and how they work things out, and also aware of such maybe segregation or separation of communities.
So when you say settlement houses, I know we're going to go to the separation of community, but when you say settlement house, what picture does that bring to mind? I mean, what is a settlement house?
Well, what it brings is that
of that time,
people,
of that period.
that, and I, stayed in the whole field of social work because of believing that it was really important. I could see the effect that a settlement house, a friendly kind of community organization that would welcome people in who were displaced or who had come in and migrated to this, or immigrated to that area, and both identifying their skills and their culture and how to celebrate that, and then also how to settle and have housing, all the basic needs.
So it's welcoming. It's more welcoming.
Yeah, welcoming. Yeah,
and it's to immigrants.
Yes. Yeah, people who were coming in from other places.
Versus today, that
or maybe
there aren't any welcoming communities today.
Well, I mean, still the settlement houses still have that mission, and I think it isn't necessarily that. And even in Caroline Mission, they had originally moved there from other places, but they also continued to establish a community development, kind of projects that helped to raise the quality of living for people in the community.
Okay, and so you're there. Your father's working in that.
Yeah.
How long did he work there in Los
Well, okay, so we were there for 5 years.
Okay.
And just beginning of the...
Any memories for you?
Yeah, okay. Well, there's, of course, a lot of memories. So I have to try to think about which ones I want to promote, remember. We were, just geographically, it was interesting because it was hot all the year round, but you can go up to the mountains for snow, and that was fun to get to know, and being more close to a big ocean. But people-wise, it was the beginning. Not only was I became aware of all the New Mexico and countries to the south, but also more aware of just the whole farm working situation where people were coming from other countries, other places to do farm working, and how the need to organize. So when Cesar Chavez started organizing in Southern California, we were still there. I didn't know too much about it, but I would hear a little bit about it, particularly with the migrant ministry, because he was in the faith-based. He was actually trying to get the Presbyterian Church to pay attention to the situations that were going on, that they should be responding to, because as people of faith, this is what we should be doing. And there was some clash. Some of the higher ups, which I think were really linked to the growers, didn't like some of the organizing that was being done at the settlement houses. And I actually, even to this day, couldn't say that I really know the situation, but he ended up having to leave the job. I think he was asked to leave. I don't know under what conditions. And so then
Your father.
Yeah. And so
because he got it kind of...
It was some clash between the administration of the Presbyterian Church and what he was doing in the Presbyterian-sponsored settlement houses, or what he saw people doing and wanted to promote something regarding that.
Okay.
But anyway, then he left, though, to go to Chicago. So that's when, and I was 12, I moved to Chicago.
So, but just a quick question. So were his parents involved in the...
Well, okay, so his parents were Gottlieb Siegentaler, who had come from Switzerland when he was 4 years old. And he came to Erie, Pennsylvania, and he became a minister. So he was also a minister, and he was. And I don't really know to what degree. He pastored a church in Baltimore, so that's where my father grew up a lot. My father was born in Buffalo, New York, moved to Columbus, Ohio, then to Baltimore, and then the rest of his high school years and still were in Baltimore. My grandparents were there, but in a church in a pretty German Swiss area of Baltimore. But also they were dealing with trying to deal with the interactions of the different communities. So my grandfather had something to do with helping to intersect with issues that were going on with the African American community, the European early community. But that impressed my father, I think, to some degree. So when he went to seminary, he was intent on being urban pastor and being involved in those things. So, that's him. And then my grandmother is French Canadian. French. She's from New Orleans. My grandfather met my grandmother down in New Orleans when he went down to visit a church. So there was a big to-do between the French and the German in New Orleans because he was German Swiss and she was French. And her family actually, she moved back up north to Baltimore. So she left her family down there. And we didn't get to visit them that much, so we know a little bit about that. But evidently, her whole family came from LeBlanc and had been part of a plantation. I think it was in New Orleans on the Mississippi, River Delta area. And I'm just blanking out. I don't know if it was cotton or sugar. I'm gonna have to look that back up. It could have been either one because there were. Beets. It's sugar beets. I don't remember the sugar beet part.
Cotton.
I think it was cotton. Yeah. So I think so. I know we have found that history.
But I don't know. But it could have been.
So these are like little small. We've
it could
gone
have been
back.
Sugar because Cuba, Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico, all those places had sugar.
Yeah.
Sugar farms.
And I saw them. That's why I'm trying to remember because we've gone back to find it, and some of them were sugar, some of them were cotton, and there were these little plantations. So they were, I guess, there was one.
But that was in the 1900s.
That was 1800s, I think.
Was it 1800s?
1800s. My grandfather went down because at that point my grandmother had been.
New Orleans.
She was born in New Orleans, so this was like her grandparents.
Right, I'm doing some research on that now, and there was sugar and
cool.
And cotton.
Yeah. So that was LeBlanc, and so she grew up speaking actually German and French. But then she moved to Baltimore, my grandfather. So that was her side, their side. And she was actually a like Sunday school teacher, so religious education, and did some teaching. I can't remember how many years.
So it runs in your family, basically. The involvement in activism. Okay, so you're in Los Angeles. Your father's a troublemaker. You're moving from where did you go?
Okay, so then our family, well, actually this is a little bit about my family, okay, the way it worked. Because my father, decided to take a job in Chicago with the thing called the Urban Training Center for Christian Mission. And so he was teaching at this, organization that I don't know if you remember it, in Chicago. He went to go teach there and be on the faculty with that. But
were they on... by Chicago Avenue, by Clark Street, did they have an office at one time?
Their first office was at 40 North Ashland, I remember, because it was part of the Baptist church building structure there. And then they moved downtown.
Casa Central was there.
Well, Casa Central
was near there or something.
Was
by Ashland.
The main thing was in Logan Square of Casa Central, but I know they did. Maybe they moved to 40 North Ashland.
Before that, they were in Ashland.
Okay. Oh yeah, I think they worked together. Yeah, you're right. I was in middle school, so I wasn't totally. But I knew it was 40 North Ashland.
Reverend Cruz and that.
Could be. I think that sounds familiar. And so okay, so we were in California getting ready for this move, and so my dad had gone ahead and checked out his job and like where we were going to live, and so he picked 3 places. One was Hyde Park, Chicago, one was Evanston, and one was York Center Community Cooperative, which was a cooperative community. So he came back and he told us all, there were 6 of us, kids and my mother, about these places, so we were going to vote to see where we were going to move. Anyway, so we voted to move to York Center Community Cooperative, which was actually in a suburb of Chicago, western suburb. It was an intentional community that was set up for people who wouldn't ordinarily be able to move to the suburbs or to more rural, country area, who were from all different backgrounds, Black, Latino, Jewish, other faiths, atheists, whatever, And this community, pretty much the suburbs were white, fleeing the inner city, I suppose. So we actually...
What do you mean fleeing?
Well,
was that going on at that?
It was at that time. This was in 1963.
Did you notice it at that time?
Well, yeah.
That's what they call it now, that they were fleeing.
Yeah, no, at the time it was really obvious because the word flee has come up to my attention. But yeah, obviously people are moving. But even like our family were moving from an inner city situation. No, it wasn't to escape. But see, ours was different. It wasn't to escape.
No, I'm not saying yours. I'm saying, but the other.
I guess. I wasn't aware of that at the time.
Fleeing.
Right. I used the word fleeing because it's been part of our vocabulary since then. But
okay.
At the time, it became part of my understanding because when we were in the co-op, we moved there, and I don't think that I had some awareness that a lot of people wouldn't have been able to buy homes out there if they weren't in a community like ours because they would be discriminated against. So I had some awareness of that. I didn't have as much awareness of how bad it was. I mean, how much, everybody outside of our community was white. Every single person. I think, unless they were hiding, because, you go to school and the only people that were Black, Latino, Jewish, atheist, Buddhist, Japanese, Asian were from our community. And we were like 85 families. And everybody else was white. So, you start asking the questions, well, why? Oh, they had been in the city and they left, and because of the crime or whatever their reason was.
Is that what they were saying? It was too much
they'd be too dangerous.
So I'm just trying to find their motivation.
Right, from where you were in Lincoln Park. From Lincoln Park.
I was just afraid of the Puerto Ricans, that's why I left.
Right.
The Puerto Ricans.
So we would, when we were in, I've jumped from California to, now to Chicago, but when we were living in the co-op, it would be the thing like, oh, we get to go to the city. Everybody else is afraid to go to the city, but we get to go to the city.
But you're living in a co-op, you said?
Yeah.
So a co-op housing?
Well, it was every family had a lot that was an acre to half an acre to an acre.
This is a rural area.
Yeah, well, it was a suburb. It was like developing suburban area.
Because this is what year?
In Chicago, 1963. Wait a minute, 3? Yeah.
So
we moved out there in 63.
A lot of country, a lot of rural.
64.
A lot of rural area.
Well, this was Western Chicago, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, now it's the center of the Metropolitan District of Chicago.
Right,
and then it was
rural, farmland.
Rural. This is unincorporated. We had Lombard address.
Oh, Lombard, okay.
Yeah, Lombard address, but it was unincorporated, so it had been a farm. And
several families bought it together?
Well, so people from the Jewish co-op in Chicago, Hyde Park Cooperatives, and from Church of the Brethren, they were the primary organizers of the initial purchase as a cooperative, and then
Church of the Brethren, are they Quakers? Are they related?
Yeah, no,
they're more Jewish.
Similar. They're not really. I mean, I couldn't tell you the exact history, but they're also Anabaptist traditions, so they are. They believe in nonviolent
Quakers Anabaptist tradition?
Anabaptist. Anabaptist, yeah.
Anabaptist?
Now don't tell me to define that, but
okay,
there's Anabaptist tradition.
You know more than I do.
Mennonite Church of the Brethren and Quaker. Mennonite. And Quaker. So they were all, war resisting, looking for nonviolent ways of solving problems.
So at that time they had communes. But
it's a cooperative. It wasn't a commune, it was a cooperative. Now
later on the term was used communes.
Well, no, because communes were, in my mind, they're different. There's much more. The thing about the cooperative was that everybody owned the land and their house, which many of the people built their houses.
More families
built their houses.
And the communists were more hippies.
People call us hippies, but I don't really like the term because it was so. It just puts people in a box that you don't really understand.
Right. I'm sorry, I apologize.
No, but that's okay.
We all have a little racism. Mine is coming out. But
that's okay.
We mean, what do we mean? We mean people that were young up from the 60s.
Yeah. So,
right.
So our parents were the ones that founded this. Not my parents, because we moved in later on, but the original organizers were families. Yeah.
And so these are cooperatives.
Right, and so we we chose partly our family when we had the little democratic process to figure out where we were moving. Part of it was understanding that this was a community that was intentionally designed to help people of various backgrounds live together and have the same opportunities. So there were 85 families. Initially, there were less, like say 40 or so, and then they accessed a little bit more land, so that the final number was 85. By the time we moved there, we were something like the 83rd or 80th family to move into the community, and they had formed in the late 40s. Mid-40s, and we moved there in 63. So already they had experienced a lot of challenges, cross burnings, just attacks on certain houses because, this was like the communists moving into the neighborhood.
So who's they're getting cross burnings too? This is the white community.
No. This is the cooperative community that I moved into.
Mixed.
That is mixed African American, Asian, Jewish, atheist. Like a lot of variety, diversity, and so that community was known in the wider white community as the outsiders coming in to destroy our whatever.
And so there's cross burnings.
Yeah.
In Chicago. So
in our neighborhood, in the suburb.
In Lombard.
York Center, which was outside of Lombard.
York Center. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Not Yorkville.
York Center. It's near there.
And near Yorkville?
Yeah, York Road.
Go fishing in Yorkville. I'm glad I didn't catch those crosses.
Well, so, but, that community actually really, it's one, another thing that I know from the history of that community, which happened before it was there, is that, like, we had biracial families and, people that were just really doing things that the wider community there thought was not very good, but at the time when people were trying to get loans, FHA loans, that was still when they first started, when FHA loans were not given to mixed race communities. When I learned this later on, I'm thinking, wow, in that period of time. So they challenged it.
That's not redlining, that's something else.
Well, it's also redlining because obviously if you can't get a loan, so that was considered a mixed race community, so nobody could get a loan.
I mean,
yeah.
You're understanding that now, or?
No, I understood that that's what had happened then. Later on. At the time, I knew that was happening, that they were having a hard time getting loans. I didn't realize it was FHA loans until later, and I read about it. Well, we had, we've looked back at the history and figured and learned more what our parents had gone through to, and the parents of the friends that lived in that community to try to maintain the community. So in order to get the loans, they challenged it in court, and it actually went to Supreme Court and won. That was unconstitutional. FHA couldn't do that. So then the loans became...
These are several communities challenging at the same time.
Yeah, I don't know who else, but Thurgood Marshall
but your community was...
Yeah,
for sure.
Thurgood Marshall argued it, and it was some lawyers from our community took it to the Supreme Court.
From your community?
Yeah.
And so was there a community organization?
Well, our York Center Community Cooperative.
Okay, the cooperative was challenging.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I, if you want to get into the real details of that, I'd have to go back and do research, because basically that's what we know, is that it was a precedent case and won to allow to say FHA loan policies were unconstitutional and needed to be provided to it. Basically it was organizing segregation.
What year was this about?
Well, I don't know the exact year when the case, I do have a thing on it, but it hasn't stayed in my memory. It probably would have been the early 50s or no, it was 60s. You're right, it wasn't until the 60s.
Yeah.
Because I guess maybe there weren't loans. At the
it.
beginning part, I don't know how they dealt with the loan situation, but I think what happened was, maybe you could get loans before that, and once they started the FHA loan program, it was only not to be given to mixed race communities, and then they couldn't get the loans because it was a mixed race community. So they challenged it in court, and it got turned. So
they wanted to keep it segregated, basically.
FHA.
Yeah.
Yeah. Federal
FHA,
government. The federal government wanted to segregate communities. That was an intentional policy of our country. I think it's talked about. It is actually talked about in the 4-part series on race. It's referred to that FHA loan, mistake that our federal government promoted during the early years of it.
Okay. So now you're living there. When did you move to Chicago?
Okay, and so that was 1963. When I moved to the actual city of Chicago.
Okay.
Because the co-op was outside of Chicago.
Right. So how long did you live in the co-op?
Well, I lived there from I was 12, and so I went to middle school, and then I went to high school at Willowbrook.
Oh, okay. No, we still have
at Willowbrook, and then I went back. Then I went to college, but I applied to 5 different colleges.
So middle school. Tell me about middle school and high school. How was that like?
Okay, well,
how was your personal life besides, or was it always blended with the political?
It was probably always somewhat blended with political, just because we lived in a polarized community. Well, in our community, people have. Well, no, our little community was very cooperative. I mean, really, there were issues, of course, but it was normal, and it was a neighborhood and very welcoming. I mean, I have friends who have written about growing up in the community. I'm going to name one exactly. It was is David Patton, who wrote a book called Dummy, and he had autism when he was growing up, and still, would be in the higher spectrum of autism category and very bright, but completely, he was shunned. He felt really rejected by school because of his learning issues, etc. Anyway, he said that growing up in the co-op was the place he felt the most, at home in his life. So it was a very welcoming, that community of those families. Outside of that was challenging. So when we were in high school, it was mixed. There were over 4,000 students in my high school. So
it was only one high school in that town.
Well, Willowbrook serves Villa Park, Lombard. It kind of covered a little bit of area, but it was the public, and it's still there, Willowbrook. But a huge high school, over 4,000 students.
So what was that school like?
It was a variety. It was a huge
mid-60s.
Yeah, it was a huge high school. So
mid-60s is the white flight that went to those areas.
Right. Yeah.
So how did you see the changes?
Well, okay. So like I said, when
you're living in that area, when people are from Chicago are moving in.
Well, we always felt like, first of all, people had already moved there. People had already moved there. There were people coming too, but I wasn't aware of that as much as they had already left. They'd already left and they were living out there. And they had left the city and they didn't want to go back to the city. The city was this bad place.
And so you would hear, what would you hear? What were the stories that you hear?
So we would, like that. Did you go to the city? Oh, wow, and it's crime and all that. But we didn't. It was like, we got to go to the city.
The N-word was used a few times?
Pardon?
The N-word was used a few times?
Oh, I'm sure. And to tell you the truth,
but you didn't hear it.
I did. I'm sure I probably did hear it. But here's the thing: I mainly socialized with my co-op friends.
Okay.
And my other friends who were from the wider outside community, because I had a church, we went to church there. They weren't necessarily the ones that were saying openly their prejudices and things. So I didn't feel it as much directly, personally, but I knew it was going on, because people would talk about it.
You saw the other,
the other
and white kids.
In the high school we had, honors classes. Almost all the kids from our community were in the honors classes because they knew how to think.
Okay.
So, and that's what I had said. I went to a 40th high school reunion, and one person from our community, Jeff Smith, and another person, Jeff Maskin, were from the outside of the community, and they had organized their 40th reunion, and they both got up to speak, and they spoke about how having the kids from the co-op who were from various backgrounds and spoke, and Jeff, the one who was from the other, his parents had told him, don't have anything to do with those kids. They're from the outside, they're troublemakers, but he said, how can my parents think that way when it seems to me like they're the only ones that are really thinking about anything. They're the ones that are like critical, that are actually thinking about how the world works. So he said, that the fact that the co-op and all of us that were there came to the schools and were interacting and stuff involved was the best thing that could have happened to that community, because they brought that in. So that's what I was aware of, those kind of talks or discussions, like either stay away, you guys are from wherever, or hey, some people in the white room say, oh, the co-op, they'd want to come to events, they'd want to come to do things, because they actually got to learn, interact and talk about what was going on in Chicago area, in their neighborhoods, or in the world that needed to be, involved in or respond to.
Okay, so there was that division between the co-op.
Yeah, and the civil rights, movement was really huge. Of course, this was the 60s.
Okay, so that impacted you?
Oh, yes, huge time. Well, okay, so, C.T. Vivian was at our house in the suburb.
I actually met C.T. Vivian. So.
Yeah, so, that's kind of an idea. He was on staff at the Urban Training Center.
Oh, that's right. That's where I met him, at 40 North Ashland.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so anyway, so we had this interaction, like I said, from the co-op. Our family did, but so did other families in the co-op.
So you were your family was related to C.T. Vivian at that time?
Well, my dad worked with him because he was at the Urban Training Center.
Okay.
So their family came out.
But I went in 69, 68, and I met C.T. Vivian for the first time. But he already knew who we were.
Yeah, I'm sure he would have been. He was very interested in your stuff, and so anyway. But I didn't, I didn't know. My father went on some of the marches. He was at the Selma March, so we would hear about Democratic, convention. I was mainly secondhand to a lot of these stories because, I was in middle school, high school. We went in a few times to the city. But it was like, it was like the other world going into the city. It actually inspired me because from then on I said, when I leave college, I'm going to the city. I want to really live in the city. So that's when I moved to Chicago.
And you went to college where?
Well, I went to college at an alternative college in Redlands, California called Johnston College.
What's it called?
Johnston.
It's an alternative college.
It was a college, part of University of Redlands. Which was actually a Baptist conservative college. I don't know how I get there. But Johnson was more of a progressive, people from, I really liked the philosophy of the school when I applied. And it was also near my grandparents, so I thought was good, in my aunt. It was good to be near relatives. And where we had lived before, and another colleague of my dad's was teaching there, so that was interesting. And so anyway, there were reasons why, and mainly too, I wanted to learn Spanish, and be connected to understanding our relationship to Latin America. I had a vision of that when I was in Chicago, so I wanted to go there.
You had a vision
of being more connected to our neighbors, southern neighbors, yeah.
But you also had the vision from being in LA before.
Yeah,
and then I
went back to it. Yeah.
Okay. So, but we're still in middle school.
Okay.
Okay, so you're...
The Beatles were out, I remember.
The Beatles were out, okay.
Well, in the cereal box, when we just moved, okay.
I don't know, if you were just proactive in the movement, that's fine, but I'm just trying to find out if you were anything else that was going on at that time.
Well,
because I didn't get involved till 68.
Right. Yes. And when I knew about you,
my parents were not involved
in anything. Yeah.
We were just in the neighborhood, the gang.
And I got involved back in Chicago, and that's when I left Chicago left California after college. I decided.
So we were into the Beatles too. We were.
Well, no, there was like, no. Okay, this is a little bit kind of funny. But when we moved to Chicago area, my family, we traveled. Okay, when we moved from St. Louis to California, we went on Highway 66 south. Okay. When we moved from LA to Chicago, we went north through Yellowstone and Glacier and all those areas. So anyway, by the time we got to Chicago, we were actually having a house built in the cooperative community, because you could do that. That was like, wow, we could really actually build our own house. economically we could afford it. My dad, with our economic situation, it was amazing to us that we could do that.
What's your mom doing during all this?
Yeah.
What's your mom doing?
Oh, and she's a preschool teacher. She actually at that time she was raising 6 kids.
Okay.
So, but when she moved to
homemaker teacher.
Yeah, 2-year-olds. That was her specialty, is 2-year-olds.
Okay.
Troublemakers too.
Well,
2-year-olds are troublemakers.
Yeah.
That's how you learn it. So she both in in California she was the kid. I mean, our family was taking up her time, but in Chicago she started teaching at we had a cooperative preschool, so we had a lot of cooperatives in the cooperative. There's a cooperative preschool she taught there.
And what about your brothers and sisters? What are they doing? Are they active?
Well, at the time,
yeah.
or at that time, or this time.
Are they younger or?
No, I'm the oldest.
Oh, you're the oldest. Okay.
I'm the oldest, but we had 5 kids in 5 years.
Okay.
And then Heidi, who was a little bit younger, she was 4 years younger. But they're all, we're all together.
Are they thinking the same way, or you?
Yes, like I said, well, and I had said earlier in the interview what each one of them was doing. I don't know if you remember that, because it was. So we say we were either fighting for, involved in our work life for bettering quality of life for plants, animals, and people. Because Terry and David are involved in conservation and justice, environmental justice, actually, and environmental preservation.
So this noise that we're hearing is basically drumming of African drums.
Right.
Because we're in the Nelson Mandela Day.
That's right.
During this interview, okay.
That's right.
So that way, okay.
Yes, that puts a context to what we're doing right now.
Yeah.
So that, where do you want me to talk?
We were talking, I just kind of asked a quick question about your other siblings.
Plants, animals, and people.
Just to get, if they were involved too.
Yeah, and at the, we all, actually in our own family as we were growing up, and my siblings will say this, the 3 older ones, which was me, my sister, and my brother, we would go with my dad a lot to do things with him. So we were probably more influenced by his work, going to the settlement houses and being involved in the early farm worker walks, huelgas, and then whatever in Chicago, going into the city to some of the stuff that was going on. But yeah.
Okay, so through high school.
But in high school, we had our own student organizations that were like, we did the moratorium for Vietnam, wore black armbands, and again, it was the kids from the co-op that were fomenting all this stuff, which some people from the outer community liked, and others thought was bad.
Okay, so you were always involved, even in school.
School
was the school a lot of students involved in the moratorium?
There's a pretty big group. I can't remember. I know. So part of the thing is that some of my fellow my friends from the co-op had a alternative newspaper, and it was an underground newspaper. I can't remember what we called it. And then we would organize moratorium. A lot of people wore black armbands. We had some of the teachers were very supportive. They used to come hang out in the co-op with. One of the deans lived in the cooperative. We used to ride to school with her. We used to, pretend we were doing some things that.
Was there a lot of students in the co-op? How many families?
Yeah. Well, there were 85 families. So
I'm thinking 8 or 9.
No, 85 families. So lots of I mean, there were a lot of kids, but since the high school was 4,000.
So this was a big farm, wherever you guys.
Yeah, but I'm saying they got other farmland too to make it, because every family had either a half acre or an acre lot.
And then other people bought more.
Well, no, it stopped at when we came in. We were some of the last families to come in to actually build a house, because after that, then if people left, they would sell their property to somebody else.
But I mean, the co-op itself bought more property, more land.
As
a group.
Just before we, at the time. Yes, exactly. Because when the way the co-op, I didn't finish explaining it. The way the co-op worked was that you bought. A membership was the value of your land and property and house. so that when you sold it, you sold the membership, not the house.
Okay.
So nobody had title to their own property. The co-op had title to the property. So as a matter of fact, about 3 years ago, it disbanded.
So when you left, you sold the land.
Process. We sold the membership.
The membership. And then that meant that the co-op stayed with the property.
So the co-op approved whoever moved into the community. So they would sell the membership to people who were moving into it. They sold the membership to it. And as part of a membership, you not only owned the property, the membership that was the value of the property, but you had work hours that you do for the community. There was a park area and a pool. The pool was actually separate cooperative, but the actual cooperative had some common property and a water system. And so you became, the membership was agreeing that you were going to be part of the philosophy of the community, and there were certain guidelines that you go by, to be a welcoming community. And
so does this still exist? Or?
Well, 3 years ago we had to go to a funeral for the cooperative because it had gone through a 10-year court process, because basically somebody else would explain exactly what happened, but people started to want to have the deeds to their property, and it was a cooperative. You don't get the deeds to your property. You have the membership. So they challenged that in court and won. And the reason why they won had to do, there are probably a lot of things, but one of them had to do with the fact that there were people pretty determined to get that property because it's very valuable. So they figured out any way they could. They got themselves into being a member without people knowing that was their agenda, and then from the inside, was able to take to court. Yeah. So unfortunately, the thing about it is, and I think some of the members of the community would say, many of them are still living there, but they call it the York Center. It's like a community association now, and they still have a lot of the same values and do a lot of things similar, but it's not as close knit because people are also living there. They don't necessarily share that philosophy. And so, but some of the members there will say that there wasn't, like, let's say African American or even Asian people who came there because of the welcoming community, but also because if they wanted to live in a suburb, they couldn't because they were black or they were Jewish or, so there isn't that need anymore. People can live there in the areas, even though it still has some of its, but it's much more diverse now, and there's not the barriers that there were back in the 40s. So the reason for its existence isn't there. But the reason to have a cooperative community is still there.
So did you have a head of the cooperative?
Yeah, there was a government, president.
And you voted on
yeah.
the cooperative. There was no clique or anything like that.
Well,
well,
I knew
how that works.
Yeah, no, there were issues, and
no Gumaraji or anything like
that. There were some things that came up, but I don't even know. They didn't for us kids, because I was mainly a kid in the co-op when I lived there. It didn't.
There's always politics.
It didn't. I think no matter what side of any kind of disagreement people were on, the philosophy was still really strong. So, like, you would always go over to somebody's house. If we had so many mothers and so many fathers, and everybody took care of everybody's kids. So it was that kind of that you can have in any neighborhood if you're cooperating enough on things. So that was always there. So that whatever disagreements were going on among the adults weren't as evident to us, but I know there were some, and I can't even talk about what they were because I don't have that close. I know later on, again, the disagreement about the deeds was a problem because some people actually thought maybe it would be a good idea to just say, okay, it's done now, So, but that was later, much later.
Okay, so now you're moving to Chicago.
To that. Okay, well, don't forget, that was Chicago, the co-op.
was in Chicago.
Well, it was a suburb of Chicago.
Suburb, yeah.
Okay, so then I went to college 4 years, and then I decided.
Okay, so when you say Chicago, you're talking Lombard.
Right.
Okay, so you never actually lived.
No. I tell you, no.
Okay.
When I I lived in Chicago most of my life. Okay. Because I went to college, and then I graduated in 1974.
Okay.
And everybody was thinking about what they wanted to do and all.
How was college?
College was great, but I tried to spend a lot of time off of campus.
Okay. Okay, so you were just there going to the classes and...
Well, I spent a year in Coachella Valley working in the farm worker community as part of my college. And
So what do you mean you work with the farm worker?
Well, I worked in one of the first federally funded daycare center projects, pilot projects in the country, in Coachella Valley, in Thermal. It's actually address was Thermal.
For the government or for the farm workers? Yeah.
I worked for a Peace Corps program called Action, University Year for Action.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And so it was the government in a sense, but we did.
That was a Peace Corps type of
yeah,
thing.
we worked with the daycare center to identify families that weren't able to get their kids to daycare, or maybe would later, and they lived, a lot of times in these little hidden ditches, sort of, or valley thingies where families had come across the border and they were just in trailers or something, or you couldn't hardly even find them. They were like little clumps of trees. So we found them, and we would just take preschool, early childhood activities, and I learned a lot about soap operas, but it was good. Helped families understand what their goals might be for their young kids in education, school preparation, stuff
What
like
do you
that.
mean you learned soap operas?
Well, because when I went to visit the families, the moms were almost always watching soap operas.
Oh, yeah, they always watch soap operas. I got you.
So I had to figure out. It was good for me because I was.
Culture is the soap opera.
Well, and I was just trying to begin learning Spanish. So they were in Spanish, and so I would just kind of soak up a little bit of the soap opera.
Stop and everything is the soap opera thing.
Yeah, so that was that was part of during college, and I really got, I really was able in that college to fulfill my goal of wanting to understand Latin American neighbors better and be connected to that culture. But I say my year abroad, because a lot of people would go, my family, everybody I knew, would go to another country abroad for a year in college. I went to Southern California.
Okay. Oh, you...
I went to Coachella Valley. That was my year abroad. I always say that was my year abroad. And it was. I lived with a family, Sarah, who I'm still in touch with, Gonzalez, and she's a single parent with 7 kids. Her husband was in jail, and she had run away when she was 14 from Mexico because she was an Alleluia. And, so I just, she was president of the parent group.
Type,
yeah. Okay. So that was why her family was, and that's what she told me. So she was Alleluia. She was president. She was a really strong, go-getter person, and she was studying. She decided she was going to go to school and get her master's in nursing. So at that point, she was just in her undergraduate, taking a few classes and raising 7 kids, and she was president of the parents group. So she identified me, and I identified her as something we could share, because she wanted to learn English and I wanted to learn Spanish. She had kids that her older kids were in my singing group, so I got to know them. So I lived with her. When all the other people in my program dropped out, I just lived with her, and for the year. So it was great. And so I had all that. College helped me do that kind of goal. So when a good friend of mine I met in college, she's still a very good friend of mine, Beatriz, she said, "Okay, Cathy, you're going to go back to Chicago," because I already decided I wanted to be near my family in Chicago now. But in the city, they could be in the suburb in co-op, which was great. But I wanted to be in the city, so I was going to move to Chicago. And she said, "You're going to forget about us, Latinos, like the whole Latino world. You're going to forget about us, because why should you have anything to do?" I said, "No, how could I ever forget about you?" This is like really part of my life now. So Yeah, so she says, Cathy, you're right. You never forget about us. So I went to Chicago and became, involved. That's why when I moved...
What neighborhood?
Well, I moved into Lakeview, but I also lived in Uptown. It was different between the 44th and 46th Ward.
So right over by the divided line?
Well, first I lived at Berry and Ashland, which was 44th Ward.
Right.
And then I moved to Jansen and just north of Addison, which was 46th Ward.
Right.
And so when I was there, I was, just when I moved there, soon after I moved to Chicago, I wanted to, I didn't know, I'd majored in social.
Original member of the Young Lords that lives right on that corner.
Which one?
And Jansen and Addison.
Right now? You mean today?
He's still, no, he just sold his house. He was there for centuries.
Wait, what's his name?
Angel Del Rivero.
Wow.
Cell, we call him Cell. He's
Okay.
one of the original
Young Lord gang members. Wow, okay.
Because the Young Lords changed in 68 to political.
Yeah.
But we started in 59.
Right.
But,
And the 59, okay, so Chacha's history that intersects with mine a little bit is that, first of all, I had heard about the organizing in Lincoln Park from my father's work with the Urban Training Center.
Okay,
because
right.
McCormick Seminary was in Lincoln Park, and my last years of high school.
And McCormick Seminary was taken over, occupied by the Young Lords.
Yeah, and I think I was actually in college when that happened, but I heard about it. But I was still like in high school when things were starting.
What did you hear about it?
Well, I heard that this is my dad was the community organizer, social action, Christian action part of the Urban Training Center. So anytime anything like that happened, students were there, supposed to be looking at it, whatever. So I don't know because I didn't know, you at the time.
Luis Cusa, did you know him?
Who?
Luis Cusa.
Well, I mean, maybe my dad did. Because my thing is that...
Reverend Ruben Cruz.
Oh, Ruben, yeah.
Yeah, they came from there.
Right.
Around that time. That's who
Right. No, they are with Casa Central and that.
We were working with them, yeah.
So I knew Casa Central, and so anyway, I knew of these things more than knew of them because I was in college. I would just be hearing some things. But when I came back, when I came back to Chicago to live in the city and lived in the Lakeview areas, I wanted to be involved in community organizing, and I was actually a mental health. I majored in social sciences and economic development, and I didn't know what I wanted to do per se. I just wanted to try different things. So I actually worked in a psychiatric hospital first and for a couple of years. So at that time, I got involved in Lakeview in the youth organizations, Lakeview Citizens Council and that.
Hilda Frontani.
Yes.
Okay,
yes. So I was kind of trying to work and, be a little involved and come to meetings and things. And
so you were a member of the Lakeview Citizens Council?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, we did work with them.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
Yeah. So, and then when your campaign was going on...
They were a neighborhood association that we got along with.
Right, that was a different one. Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So, and then I was more peripherally involved with your campaign stuff because I was in 44th Ward at the time, actually.
Okay.
So that's what I'm remembering now. I wasn't in that ward, the 46th, but then I moved to 46th Ward, and that's when, soon after Helen Schiller started, when you were involved in her campaigns and stuff.
Right.
So I knew of you from all, a little bit of all the organizing that you'd done, because then I, of course, all along since I moved.
So what were you thinking at all about the campaign? Not me as an individual, but the campaign.
Well, the whole campaign, both where it started from what I knew and up, was basically this was supposed to be an effort that was really going to address the needs of the community and really listen to the voices of people, what people wanted in the community, and also not to fight against any the kind of things that were coming in just for moneymakers, which would be the gentrification, and so I mean all these sort of idealistic ideas that fit in my mind, really trying to make them work for people. And to me, especially at that time, it was like I know theoretically what this is supposed to look like or why it sounds that way, but how do we really make it work? So, which is always a question. Today is a question. so I was involved in kind of the youth committee, and then on the campaign I wanted to be block captain, so I would just go around, talk to people, try to help make sure they knew that they can get out and vote, because usually for people who believe that way, they're the ones that don't vote. It wasn't as much, it was changing some minds, but it was more getting people who felt like nobody's going to listen to me
right, so
to get out to vote. People that are
already active, they don't vote. Is that what you're saying?
No, well, no. I was saying that the people who were resigned to thinking nobody's ever going to listen to my voice wouldn't vote.
That's right.
So it's like saying, hey, pay attention now. Now's the time to vote, and pay attention, because really there's a possibility of getting some people in office that will be doing things that we want to see happen in our communities, not just try to kick us out and bring in this more wealthy, business, whatever, So yeah, it was trying from the beginning, as you can hear a little bit from my history. I mean, I've in my mind, and I think in all my family, my siblings and stuff, my culture is to create. We know that healthier communities are diverse economically, culturally, and they're more interesting. And I just don't even feel at home in any community that's very homogeneous, especially if they're wealthy. It's like there's a lot of secret stuff going on that isn't good for people. So. In general, that's the mindset, and so just trying to make that work.
Okay, so then you got involved with the Helen Schiller campaign?
Yeah.
And you stayed living there? I
lived at Jansen in 46th Ward until I married my husband Al, and we decided to buy a house that was closer to his work.
How did you meet Al?
Well, actually, Al was a pastor at the Church of the Good News, which was in the Lathrop housing community over in, I guess it was part of Lakeview,
I think that's familiar too. That's pretty.
Yeah.
But the Lathrop homes, definitely.
Right.
There were Puerto Ricans living there.
Oh yeah. It was very, very diverse little community over there. Diverse, so we moved over there. It was like, white, black, and Latino. We didn't live into Lathrop, but no, you couldn't. You had to have, it was a completely segregated low-income community. Right. I mean, but we lived like a block away. We lived 2 blocks away. Yeah, we lived in the neighborhood by it. So.
So you were working with the church?
Well, I didn't. My husband worked with that church. I stayed part of my church, which was in the 46th Ward, which is Lakeview Presbyterian.
Okay, but you met with church?
No, okay. Well, okay, I was doing my master's, and I had decided by that point to get a master's in social work after having directed a school-age child care program in the 46th Ward. Well, no, once it was in the first one I worked at was in the 46th Ward, so that was another reason to be involved in Helen Schiller's shoot, promoting those kinds of services for kids and families. And then I went to Broadway Children's Center. That was Greenview Children's Center. Then I went to Broadway Children's Center, which was in Lakeview in 44th Ward. And Dick Simpson, worked with him on that. And then, but my husband was working with Church of the Good News over in the Lathrop community. So we moved over there. So back into now I can't even remember, I can't remember what ward that was in. But anyway, that was long after you were done, because that was in 86.
It might be part of the Logan Square 33rd.
It's part of Logan's
33rd Ward.
It was right on the border of that. And of course I voted, but I didn't know at the time. But anyway, so both of my work and my living situations between 44th, 46th Ward were very, I think the 44th Ward was more, even though of course gentrification was a big deal there and all that kind of thing was going on, it was also a lot of efforts that had a very active alderman where things were getting done that were meeting, needs of some people. But in 46th, it was really considered the opportunity to keep a neighborhood more diverse and active in responding to needs, challenging the big money makers that were coming in.
Okay, so how did you get to Grand Rapids? Because we're gonna.
It's my husband's fault. No, I love Chicago.
We're not gonna cut this.
That's okay. No, I say it a lot. Everybody who knows me knows it. And it's not so much, I mean, it is partly Grand Rapids in the sense that it's Grand Rapids area really has had history, and I've experienced it a lot as well, of being, the nice place to live where everybody knows their spot and doesn't challenge it. A lot of people are challenging it right now, and it's becoming more diverse, and maybe good things are happening, and I love it in many ways. I had a hard time moving here because I love Chicago.
And did you move to what neighborhood?
Well, we moved to the neighborhood we're in right now, and that was luck.
Wealthy Street?
It's on College, between Wealthy and Franklin, closer to Franklin.
Closer to Franklin?
Yeah, we're outside of Heritage Hill. We're in South Hill.
Okay, the South Hill.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
South Hill. So my husband was having a hard time finding the work he wanted to do in Chicago at that time, and he was doing pastoring and substance abuse counseling. He was also from the Kalamazoo area, and we wanted to be near his sister and mother. So both those things together, we decided to move to this area, and I wanted to be in a more diverse, larger place than Kalamazoo or Holland or whatever. So we found Grand Rapids because it had the school that our kids had started attending, a Spanish immersion school, Spanish dual immersion school. And it wasn't dual immersion at the time, but we fought for it to become dual, which means that both first language Spanish and first language English kids can be in the same school, which is where we had started in Chicago. Another evidence of our wanting to be connected to the communities of our Latin American neighbors and United States. So anyway, the school, I didn't want to leave the school or that process, and we found one in Grand Rapids. So I always say, I've even said things at the Grand Rapids school board meetings, and that the reason why we moved to Grand Rapids was because of that school. And we have fought, I've been involved both as a parent and as a outside agency person working in the school and as a community member to keep that school alive in my little ways. So.
What year did you come here, and any final thoughts?
Okay, I came here in 1996. I think that I've experienced over and over again the reasons, the fear, maybe concerns I had about moving here were that this is an area that is too nice, not inclined to critically examine, and coming from a background where actually being a shy person, but also knowing that it's important to critically examine, figuring out how to present my voice to involvement and action, countering that. So I've had both experiences. I've experienced that big time, and it's still here. And at the same time, I've experienced like the thing that's going on today, and even the process that Cha-Cha is involved in, and even by seeing that Cha-Cha came from Chicago to Grand Rapids, it's so funny, that a lot of really neat things are happening, and I keep wanting to try to be part of that.
Okay. Any final thoughts?
That's final.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it, Cathy.